if everything is on top. Good. Thank you so much. So good morning, good afternoon, and good evening here from Washington, D.C., and a warm welcome to this Faith for Earth dialogue on religion and science. My name is Espen Lundelarsen, and I'm the Director of Faith and Sustainability at the World Resources Institute here in Washington, D.C. And I'll be your moderator for this session that is co-hosted by the UN Faith for Earth, Yale Forum on Religion and Ecology, and the World Resources Institute, Faith and Sustainability. It is on a dark backdrop of the Russian invasion of the Ukraine, heavily violating international law, human rights, and social justice that we meet today, but there is a strong need for the sort of dialogue that we are about to have. A dialogue where the voices of science and religion are heard, where we seek to find common ground to engage on relevant topics, but also hearing the voices of science and religion together and not only separately. It is important to find common ground to engage on relevant topics, but also to contribute to policy-making bodies, and this is one of the reasons why we are together. The Faith Science Consortium is created to bring together religious scholars, scientists, and environmentalists to bridge the knowledge gap between environmental and natural sciences and religions. And this consortium is responsible to provide the scientific faith-based evidence connected to faith teachings on caring for natural resources. To inspire us before our two breakout sessions, we have 4 short interventions by distinguished speakers that will be introduced individually before each part. I'll be introducing the first 2, whilst our keynote speakers will be introduced by Mary Evelyn Tucker. Our first speaker is Iyad Abumogli, the director of the UN Faith, addressing the purpose, the structure, and the practice of a Science-Religion Consortium. Iyad, warm welcome. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Espen. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everybody. Thank you for taking this on board in the 5th day of the Faith for Earth dialogue. We have been having excellent sessions over the past week. We still have 1 week to go, but the good news is that we have around 600 registered participants to attend our Faith for Earth dialogue. I'm sure many more people will be joining this session as we go on. Now, of course, as you know, everybody knows that the UN Environment Program is a science-based organization which is responsible for the environmental component of sustainable development in addition to economy and social cohesion. Also, you know that the policies, conventions, environmental rule of law, and other national and international policies and agreements are always based on scientific evidence. So when the international community discusses environmental issues such as climate change, they refer to the IPCC scientific findings. Or when they discuss ecosystems and biodiversity, they refer to the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, or what is called the IPBS, and similarly on other environmental priority areas. However, science is not the only way of knowing and understanding our relationship with nature and what we should do. Religions have a lot to say. For religious institutions and religious actors, their main reference is the religious scripts, traditions, or practices that have been there for thousands of years. Only recently, religious leaders have been calling to listen to what the scientists are saying, certainly the science that is related to the environment, that is. Now, studying the relationship between science and religions started early in the last century, in the 1960s, with scholars challenging that there is a divide between science and religion. Therefore, a question to be asked, do we really have productive collaboration between scientists and religious scholars or religions? Recently, in preparation for COP26, and some of you have been part of that, the Vatican, the UK and Italian governments, with support from Faith for Earth, led a process called Faith and Science for COP26. While this process brought together climate scientists and religious leaders, there was no real dialogue, but two sides listening to what the others are saying on one common theme, which is climate change. Religious leaders, to be able to speak with some degree of scientific authority, they need close ties to scientists. Now, while we can easily notice that religions do refer to scientific evidence, but do scientists refer to religious teachings? For example, science says that climate change is a result of our overconsumption behavior. Religions too say the same thing from a different perspective, that is, abusing the trust that the divine gave us is a sin or a sign of corruption, and that we will face the consequences. So we hear religious leaders referring to the scientific evidence, but rarely we hear a scientist referring to our moral responsibility and how our religions are requesting us to behave with nature. Now, I'm talking about sciences not related to religious studies. In the past 20 or so years, we saw leadership by some scholars from different organizations, not necessarily faith leaders, but scholars specialized on religious issues, such as, of course, our great sister Mary Evelyn Tucker, John Graham, Fazlun Khalid, Ibrahim Wazdamir, and many others, who brought ecology and religious studies together. We also see some universities with units or centers on religions, but I believe we need to create more knowledge and disseminate it, not only to those interested in religions, but also to scientists and to decision makers. A lot has been said about the power of religions in mobilizing action on environmental sustainability. But do we have the scientific evidence to back this up? Do we have the scientific evidence to know how many churches are green? How many churches or mosques or temples are there in general? And how many faith-based organizations work on climate change? What is their impact or footprint? What has the Laudato Si movement resulted in terms of measurable indicators or success? What would be the impact of Al-Mizan or other efforts? And so on. Therefore, there is a lack of data that would support these claims. Therefore, at the Faith for Earth initiative and as part of the global Faith for Earth coalition we are launching, we wanted to strengthen and reinforce the ties and the common understanding between religions and sciences on environmental issues, that is. The Religion and Science Consortium has been designed to be one of the main pillars of the Faith for Earth coalition. The purpose, as mentioned by Espen a little while ago, is that the Religion and Science Consortium is created to bring together the scholars, the scientists, and environmentalists to bridge that gap or to maximize the relationship between scientists and theologians or religious scholars from different religions. So over the past few months, we have been receiving requests from scholars and institutions that work on issues related to religions to be members of this Science-Religion Consortium. Today, our meeting now is important in defining what this consortium is or what this consortium is not. What should be the purpose? What are the thematic focus areas? And how do we keep this consortium relevant and effective to scientists, to religious scholars, and even to policymakers and to private sector, to others? And how this consortium should advise both the faith leaders and as well as the scientific-based institutions. So I do very much hope that the deliberations of today can give us a clear vision on the way forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Iyad. The next speaker is Mary Evelyn Tucker, the co-director of the Yale Forum on Religion and Ecology, enlightening us with a brief history of previous religion science efforts. So Mary Evelyn, the floor is yours.
Thank you. And I think we're going to have a outline. Yes, Azamira, on the, thank you so much. So, of course, there's a long history here, and Ursula Gudenov, my good friend, will take up some of this as well. But I just wanted to give an overarching picture of what has happened in the past and where we are at the present. C.P. Snow of Cambridge University in 1959 did a very influential article and book called The Two Cultures. And there he saw them as split. And this he saw as an obstacle for solving world problems. And indeed it is, because we are still very much part of this two cultures mindset. I'm in the School of the Environment here at Yale, a 120-year-old school, science-based school, excellent ecology, hydrology, and so on. And this is why we're pleased to work with UNEP and especially Iyad Abou-Mogli and Faith for Earth. But we were working with UNEP since 1987 as well to try and bridge this gap. Just as Iyad said so eloquently, the religions have something to say. Now, this two cultures was the overcoming of it is an ongoing process. And complementarity is something that Ian Barber, one of the great scientists at Carleton College, even from 1960, he disagreed that these two cultures were so split that they could never really talk or dialogue. And so he argued for dialogue and understanding throughout his very distinguished career. He felt there were four different ways that science and religion could interact. One is this conflict model that we just discussed. Another is kind of independence, two separate magisterium, which we'll get to, or dialogue and integration. And fortunately, because of Ursula's work and others, we've moved toward dialogue and integration in the last couple decades in substantial ways, but we have a long way to go. Now, Stephen Jay Gould at Harvard University, very influential scientist, in 1987 spoke of non-overlapping mirus magisterium. It was called NOMA of science and religion. They do not overlap. We have facts on the one hand given by science, values on the other from religion. So this independence model is still quite strong, I must say. In all of the work that we're doing, there are scientists, again, such as Ursula, who understand this, but by and large, we don't have yet a dialogue that is integrated and where we need to understand the methods and models of the two different approaches. Now, consilience, Ed Wilson, the distinguished scientist at Harvard, wrote this book on the unity of knowledge in 1998, and we were there at Harvard doing these conferences on religion and ecology and heard him speak, and he was very much part of our conferences at Harvard and supported the role of religion, as did Tom Lovejoy. Both of them just died recently, great proponents of biodiversity and so on. But it would be the case, it would be fair to say that that book was extremely important, but it still said we need dialogue, but there's a primacy of science. And so Wendell Berry and some others, I think perhaps a little unfairly, but attacked Wilson because of that. Now, this ongoing dialogue needs to come to consilience because Ed Wilson really intended synthesis. He didn't intend independence. Now, I'm so pleased that Ursula's with us today because she's been very active in dialogue, and she has helped found a whole program group movement, if you will, on religious naturalism, and I'll introduce her further in a moment. She's done this magnificent book called Sacred Depths of Nature from Oxford, which is having a new revised, renewed issue publication this year, which we're thrilled about. So she'll talk more in a moment. But she does the science, and then she does the awe, wonder, beauty, complexity. And that is part of how these two disciplines can come together through awe, wonder, beauty, complexity, and care for the future. Now, integration or interwoven, Brian Swim, my colleague, who's a cosmological physicist and mathematician, and has worked for many years to say we need a new story, a universe story, that he did with Thomas Berry in 1992. And we worked for 10 years to give out The Journey of the Universe, which is a film and a book and a series of conversations. And that is trying to integrate the story of evolution and ecology as a means of inspiration for our sensibilities of working together for a flourishing future. Now, much of that was based on the mutually enhancing human-Earth relations of this kind of dialogue and integration of Thomas Berry, who was committed to science, especially evolution and ecology, and his commitment also to the livingness of the natural world. He said, we live not in a universe of a collection of objects, but a communion of subjects. This subjectivity, this dimension of interiority, the livingness of animals, birds, plants, etc., that's exploding around our planet today in consciousness. So let me conclude by saying this complex weave has now emerged with a focus on shared concern for our planetary future. And I want to broaden it even beyond religion, because science and humanities coming together, and this includes philosophy, history, ethics, the arts, and so on. All of these are needed. And so I hope this consortium will be, musical to that idea, because what we do have in place now are environmental sciences that are attending to our understanding of ecosystems, bioregions, problems like climate change, biodiversity, pollution, but they are basing it on this sense of interdependence and a holistic approach that Eugene Odum, one of the founders of ecology, had in mind, that there's a holistic sensibility here behind the ecological sciences. And similarly, environmental humanities. At Yale, we have 130 classes now in environmental humanities, very much based on this integral ecology that's very central to Laudato Si. And I'm picking up interbeing, which is a word that Thich Nhat Hanh, the great Vietnamese Zen leader who just passed away, he used. So an organic holism from this perspective of the environmental humanities. So finally, then, this interrelationality of humans with nature, this is something we've been trying to do for 25 years with the Forum on Religion and Ecology. We hope that those resources will be useful to you. I think the URL for that and for Journey of the Universe will be in the chat. And we're so grateful to be working with Iyad Abu-Mogli, who's done an outstanding job in the last several years in launching Faith for Earth and this amazing dialogue within UNEA as well. And Espen, grateful to be working with you at WRI. Let me turn over now the floor to our colleague and friend for so many years, Ursula Gudenov. She is an emerita professor at Washington University in St. Louis, one of our finest universities. And she authored this book, as I mentioned, on the sacred depths of nature. And she's done presentations on religious naturalism around the world and the epic of evolution. We were together at the Field Museum many years ago, 97, I believe, on an epic of evolution conference. She's contributed to NPR blog on cosmos and culture from 2009 to 2011, and she serves as president of the Religious Naturalist Association. But for many years, she has been working also with the Institute for Religion in an Age of Science as president, board member, and so on. One of the most distinguished things about Ursula, I feel, is that for 10 years, she joined with a physicist and earth scientist and taught a course called The Epic of Evolution for non-science majors. Let's turn it over to Ursula for the reconciliation of science and religion. Thank you, Ursula.
Thank you, Mary Evelyn. So now I have to figure out whether my PowerPoint is going to appear. It's been an honor to be here and to work to understand that the United Nations has and picked up the torch and marching with it. So with such an exciting group of people.
Ursula, can you see your presentation?
No, I can't.
There should be a tiny box somewhere at the bottom of your screen. Click on
Tiny
that.
box. There are all sorts of things of people, but I don't see any slides.
Okay.
Oh, wait a minute. Wait a minute. Take control. Is that what I'm supposed to do? No. This is not my presentation, however.
We can see it, Ursula.
Oh, I see. Oh, it's somebody made it green. Okay. Pretty slides, not. But the first slide that I'm seeing anyway is not the first slide of what I submitted. Let's.
Ursula, is it better that Ashmira is, running the show, so you just speak and then you say when she should change the?
That's fine,
yeah.
but I need to see what she's showing, which is still not happening for me.
Ashmira, try and share your screen again, because now we have Ursula in the big picture, and then Ursula, I'm sure it is your presentation I could see, so I think you can be very confident in that. Just in a 1 minute.
I saw it, but it was starting on the third or fourth slide, so that. Let's see what happens now. Click. PowerPoint, Microsoft. Yeah, the third slide is still not the first slide. The first two slides are images that, yay, okay, here we go. My presentation is a lot less pretty. All right, so the title I was given for my talk was Reconciling Science and Religion, and I looked up reconcile. It means to cause to coexist in harmony, to make or show to be compatible. And this kind of verb is the one, as Mary Evelyn noted earlier, that has been predominant in the religion science community, that were somehow independent projects that at best can live in harmony, can be compatible, and so on. And what I and a number of others, including Mary Evelyn and John and many others around the world, have been doing is instead, now click the slide, or do I get the next slide? Yes, all right, I do it. Would be framed in different language. First, the concept is not to talk about science, but to talk about science-based understandings, which is a very different notion than the doing of science, and then to merge these understandings with religion-based understandings. So let's go to religion-based understandings first. And historically, these understandings have been conveyed to the practitioners of traditional religions in the form of large stories, mythos. And we can take, for example, Buddhism. So the large story in Buddhism is the life of the Buddha, his teachings, his writings, and his understandings that are then carried on through the centuries to persons who self-identify with the Buddhist tradition. And the responses to these large stories, I would say, can be categorized under three headings. First, the interpretive. So what does this story mean? What does it tell me about the meaning of life? What does it tell me about death? What does it tell me about all sorts of existential issues that persons enter a religion hoping to explore? The second would be the spiritual parameter, where spiritual I see as meaning internal. So spiritual responses to the story would include awe and wonder, would include gratitude, reverence, assent, humility, all sorts of interior religious responses. And the third would be moral, which has to do with our relationship to other beings, other humans, the other persons in the religion and persons around the world. What are our responsibilities? What are our obligations? And how do we rejoice in our communion with one another? So the outcome of this trajectory has been all of the world's religious traditions. These continue to be integral to our cultures. I don't think anybody would even in this dialogue would say that these traditions are anything other than very central and integral parts of our planetary history and planetary dynamics. So now we have the science-based understandings, and these science-based understandings have contributed enormously to what we call technology. I'll get to that at the end, but they have also, along the way, generated what we can call a naturalist worldview. Big Bang, formation of stars, formation of the Earth, origin of life, evolution of life, and our current planetary ecosystem, which I like to call the planetary matrix, that includes both the Earth systems and the beings that arose from within the planetary matrix and depend on the planetary matrix and one another. This story has been given many names: Journey of the Universe, Epic of Evolution. I'm particularly drawn to the name that was given to it by philosopher Loyal Rue. He calls it everybody's story. And I think that's important, particularly for this group, because it's a story that, shall we say, I don't want to say transcends in an important way, but transcends in the sense that all of us are embedded in this story, as well as in the traditional stories that we have had from our culture. So everybody's story is, in fact, another one of these large stories and myths. It wasn't written by humans. It comes from our curiosity about how science works. But to my mind, it is an equally important and essential story for human beings. And in that sense, it elicits the same three modes of response. The interpretive, how do we interpret this story? How do we see our place in it? What does this story tell us, again, about the meaning of life, about death, about the origins of evil? All sorts of questions can be asked in the context of everybody's story. Again, there are spiritual responses, the same list, but this time focused on the story of the Earth and its beings. And then moral, the particular focus of our work here, which is how does this story impact how we interact with one another. And the outcome of this kind of exercise is something that we're calling a religious naturalist orientation. We're not calling it a religion, but an orientation that is religious and that invokes our naturalistic understandings. And this orientation is open to all peoples and has that kind of inherent ecumenicalism, if you will. Importantly also is that there are many overlaps between religious naturalist understandings and traditional religious understandings. The traditional religious understandings were birthed in the context of nature, of course, because humans are part of nature. And in many cases, we find examples where the large stories of the traditions overlap with the large story told in everybody's story. I can give two examples. One is that the interrelatedness and the interdependence of all things is central to everybody's story. It comes via our understandings of the evolution of life and the dynamics of ecosystems. And these same concepts are integral to most indigenous traditions and to many Asian traditions. So there has been a coming together of these two sensibilities reaching the same conclusions. The second example is that the sacredness of nature is embedded in everybody's story. Nature is what is sacred to humanity. And this overlaps with the Abrahamic understandings that the earth and life are God's creations and God is interested and so on. So there does not need to be, to my mind, separate magisteria and all of these other distinctions. I believe that the human religious impulse is one that can function both within the traditions and in response to everybody's story. A key component of the religious naturalist orientation and this group and is something that I'm calling eco-morality, others are calling it eco-justice. It's the notion that our moral obligations at this moment in time, I believe, need to be focused on planetary and local ecosystems. Now, of course, I'm saying this in the context of the horrors that are going on in Ukraine, and obviously we have huge importance to focus on peace and justice as well in the political level. But it's all happening in the context of our planetary ecosystem, and that ecosystem is under great threat in our times. And as Ian said earlier, our understandings of how these global and local ecosystems work must be science-laden. Scientists are probing, are asking, are curious, are coming up with all sorts of understandings about how the global ecosystems work, notably with climate change. And this work, although some excoriated as being reductionistic, it's important to understand what reductionism means to a scientist. For a scientist, we reduce in order to understand who all the players are, what's happening, how everything is happening, and then we all synthesize, we all become holistic, we all look at what these reductionist understandings mean in terms of larger patterns, larger ways of knowing. And I would say that then these understandings can guide, not be the sole guide, but guide our religious quest to best fit into and sustain and restore these ecosystems. So if that's the plan of eco-morality, then there really is no distinction, I would say, between religious activities and scientific activities. We're all looking at the same goal. And finally, let me say a word about technology, since I think Chris is going to be bringing this in, and that is the question of technology. So science and technology often get confused, and particularly people who are upset about the very egregious fallouts of many of our technological enterprises sort of blame science for this. And I think it's very important to understand the difference. So the practice of science, what we're doing is trying to discover how the natural world works. The natural world just is, we can't change it. The only thing we can do is understand it. And then technology comes in and uses these discoveries to make things. So a technological project and a scientific project, although people may have the same degrees, they may be working side by side at the bench, they are asking, they are performing different kinds of queries. And I would further say that these technologies that arise from our understandings of the natural world While some of them have been horrific and damaging, what we need to focus on is mindful technologies, technologies that I believe are going to be essential to earthly restoration. And these technologies, of course, include development of sources of energy so that fossil fuels can be forever left under the ground, and many bioremediation projects, such as the ones that are now in place to try to bring back to life the coral reef system that's essential to the global community. So I encourage everyone to shed all of their distinctions between religion, science, technology, how these are all something that we have to think about separately, and instead integrate them into a whole that moves forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Ursula, so much. That was wonderful. And so good to be with you, and wonderful to be with Chris Carter, who is in California. So it's 5 a.m. there, and we're grateful to you for being here. Chris is an assistant professor of theology and religious studies at the University of San Diego and a commissioned elder in the United Methodist Church. His research, teaching, and activism centers on racial justice, specifically systemic environmental injustices experienced by Black, Indigenous, and other peoples of color, now known as BIPOC. The Reverend Dr. Carter explores how religion, animal agriculture, and the institution of factory farming affect food choices within the African American community and beyond, I would suggest, and how these play a critical part in the marginalization of Black, Indigenous, and Latinx people. He is co-author of the book, The Future of Meat Without Animals, and now a new author of his book, The Spirit of Soul Food, Race, Faith, and Food Justice, which is getting amazing responses. So Chris, over to you with deep gratitude for your work and all the things that you are doing in our world these days. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you, Mary Evelyn. I just opened the share settings, and hopefully, can you all see the presentation?
Yes.
All right, cool. Let me, not sure if that's here real quick. Perfect. So the title of my presentation, well, first, thank you all for having me. This is a really excellent opportunity, and I wish I could be outside so you could actually see when the sun rises, just how beautiful it is here in San Diego. But as I was saying earlier, my 3-year-old son is in the house napping or sleeping, and it's too much of a risk for me to be inside or anywhere near a window that he might wake up while we're talking. My focus today is really going to be a little bit of a brief history on the relationship between religion and science, specifically as it relates to food and environmental justice. And I think after listening to just the tail end of what Ursula just said, I'm definitely going to try and draw some clear distinctions between what I mean when I say science, what I'm talking about when I say technology. So thank you for leading me down that path. I'll have to definitely do some more thinking about that. Well, what I want to make clear here is that when we are talking about this intersection, when we are talking about the application of technologies, really, we must recognize that lives are at stake. As we're specifically as relates to our food system, we must grapple with the reality is that we produce more than enough food globally to feed people, and yet we have people who are either on one end of the spectrum, or I guess as Raj Patel calls it, stuffed and starved. People who have access to too many calories and people who do not have access to enough. And so what I want to do today is help us understand kind of both how and why a holistic approach to food justice allows us to engage multiple challenges or I guess I should say, engage the challenge of food injustice from multiple perspectives and to address issues such as climate change, poverty, colonization, and racism. When you're speaking about food and science, especially I would say post-World War II, I want to kind of help us at least frame the fact that obviously food is critical to the survival of our species, right? And scientific and technological advancements have helped us grow more food, which has been crucial as population has continued to increase. Like that is beyond a doubt one of the benefits. With respect to religion, food is a product of religious and cultural meaning making, right? So much of our identities are wrapped up in the things that we eat. That is how we understand, to an extent, who we are by what we eat and what we serve to others. Also, within the framework of food and religion, we have a moral obligation to care for the most vulnerable, those who do not have access to food. You find this in multiple religious traditions. And yet the challenge I think that has resulted is that we have developed a kind of disconnect to an extent between the moral and religious significance of food and the scientific and technological advancements of food production. And we tend to prioritize the scientific without consideration for the ecological impact of these scientific advancements. And thus we deal with real significant implications as it relates to industrial agriculture. So how did we get here? There's a few things that I think are really important for us to cover to understand how we got to the point where science and technologies really have been weaponized in ways that have harmed people. And in particular, I want to spend some time talking about people of color. First of all, is the legacy of colonialism. This is also what we might be called the cheapening of life, like the cheapening of both human life and non-human life. The idea that it can be quantified in a particular kind of way from an economic perspective. Cheapening, we could say, is a practice of violence that mobilizes all kinds of work, human and animal, botanical and geological, with little compensation as possible. We see this with the advancement of the particular kind of capitalism that we've grown to today. This has a scientific and philosophical basis and background because we see philosophers such as Rene Descartes and scientists such as Francis Bacon, among many others, make the argument that there is this boundary between society and nature, and that people of color and people who are in what we would now call developing countries are in nature and not a part of society, and those boundaries became policed. And they used scientific arguments, so they say, to make the claims that these people, from their perspective, were not a part of or need to be considered in the same realm of the human. And so that kind of scientific, that ideology is still manifest today. Essentially, we see it being played out, recognizing within our food system today that the former nations who had previously colonized these territories managed to replace the old colonial instruments of command and control with newer, cheaper mechanisms of self, quote unquote, imposed market discipline. We also have to recognize, with respect to technologies, right, the Green Revolution, the ways in which chemicals, as a result of World War II, the chemical use of growing food just rapidly increased. That also then spread quickly across Asia. And within 20 years, almost half of the wheat and rice land developing countries was being sown with new varieties. This way of producing food exhausts the land and made it difficult to grow food without massive chemical inputs that obviously cost a significant chunk of money, and ultimately has led to an epidemic, quite honestly, of farmer suicide, not only in, well, just all over the world, particularly I would say Asia and North America are particularly dealing with this tragedy right now. The other thing we have to consider is recognizing that currently our system is set up to feed those who are in power. We have a great deal of geopolitical influence that shapes the trade agreements that benefit wealthy countries. So that be the agreements between the World Trade Organization and the World Bank that have siphoned money and power to, again, what we would call developed countries, to allow them to have access to foods and foodstuffs and agricultural resources in ways that allows them to leverage their strength so that developing countries just have to be exporters. A corporate control has taken over key aspects of our food system. So that way, large corporations control the food system from food to fork. This graph right here kind of makes it manifest from an American perspective, how few companies really are involved in the distribution. So there's a bottleneck that really limits and handicaps the development of a healthy system, and ultimately, again, small farmers suffer under the pragmatic stress of competing in this model, right? So their own particular desire to feed themselves and their communities is stifled, and this leads to the dramas that I spoke about earlier. So what can religion offer? How might religion help us address food injustice? This is where I believe fundamentally we can dive into the rituals and the narrative dimension of food. And I'm just going to speak briefly about two traditions here, traditions that I'm just familiar with and people that I know. Jonathan Safran Foer, who's an acquaintance of mine, I should say, and his book, Eating Animals, really, I think, helps make explicit the narrative dimension of what it means to eat kashrut, what it means to recognize that as much of their particular kind of ritual celebrations that are tied with his practice of Judaism are tied to certain things that are eaten on specific occasions, and that allows them to tell a story. And this story not only allows him to feel connected to his family and his tradition and his people, but also connected to broader non-human nature, right? And that kind of story allows us to feel the kinds of moral obligations that I think Ursula was speaking of when, in this sense, I think eco-morality is quite apropos when you're talking about it from a religious perspective. And my own work with respect to soul food does much the same, but looking at it, food from a Black American perspective, making the connection between the development of Western African foodways and the export of that kind of knowledge to America, and the recapturing of that knowledge for Black Americans today, so that recognizing that our dietary understandings of who we are don't just begin with our enslavement. Rather, they really are inherited Africanisms that are lived out today, that tell a story of survival, a story of thriving, and a story of resistance. Again, this way of eating allows us to be connected to each other, connects us to the land, particularly as Black folks in America, because that is ultimately why we were brought here, because of our agricultural acumen. And so within these kinds of narratives, within the rituals of eating, what I'm suggesting is that we have the option and the capacity to really do a deep dive to manifest the kind of interconnectedness that I think is important to cultivate an ecological consciousness. Now, this, I believe, ultimately can set the framework and put us on pace to move towards a decolonial model. Right. And so this is where I think religion, science, and technologies can really work together. Religion gives us a moral framework to argue for decolonizing our food system, fundamentally recognizing that all human beings and the entire biotic community suffer within this modernity, coloniality, dualistic worldview that I said earlier. So this is just making it clear that while much of this presentation is centered on the exploitation of people of color, all life is wrapped up in this dualistic worldview, and all people have trauma and suffer from this. And so decolonizing seeks to unsettle some of those fundamental principles that really allow certain people to feel as though they, or I should say, the ideologies that inform the belief that they have more value than others, and allows folks to envision alternative futures where institutions can be at the service of life rather than life being at the service of institutions. Some of the themes that I think are important with respect to how we think about and recognize the importance of decolonization is human dignity, recognizing that all people have sacred worth, that all people have responsibility towards each other, moving towards something we will call the common good. These are fundamentally decolonial principles that are wrapped up also in religious principles. And that these moral principles, I would argue, should also guide our use of ecological resources. What does this look like on a practical level with respect to religion, technologies, and science? I would argue with respect to food, it pushes us to really move towards agroecology. This is a kind of integrated approach that simultaneously applies ecological and social concepts and principles to the design and management of food and agricultural systems. It's bottom up. So it starts with those stories that I mentioned earlier, right? It starts with those cultural ways in which folks have understand the production and distribution of food. These innovations are based on a co-creation of knowledge, combining science and traditional practical and local knowledge of producers, right? And so you're able to glean from the traditional wisdom of communities and let science be a complement to that, right? So that we can enhance what is already done. And it doesn't come to a community with the assumption of having all the answers. It takes their own particular kind of epistemologies, right? Or their own particular kinds of knowledges that are local to them and considers them as valuable, as having worth, and not just something that can be set aside. Decolonizing is helpful also because it recenters the production and distribution of food to the local economy. And so in this sense, it prioritizes the farmer and their community. And lastly, the fundamental principle within this particular framework of agroecology is that it recognizes the interconnection of all life. It's moving towards a way of growing food, of producing food that doesn't rely on the kind of large chemical inputs, that's intercropping, that recognizes and to the extent that it can, makes sure that life is understood to be sacred in the process of development and the production of food. So there's so much more I can say about agroecology because I think it's amazing. There's a lot of great work actually happening in particularly in Africa right now, but I think that's enough for today. So thank you for the chance to speak, and I look forward to the rest of this conversation.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you for being a wonderful advisor to the Forum on Religion and Ecology too. Back over to Espen. Thanks again, Chris. Wonderful.
Thank you very much to all our 4 distinguished speakers. We will now move on to our 2 breakout sessions where we will have 40 minutes to discuss 2 important aspects of the work of the consortium. The engagement part, where Mary Evelyn Tucker will be the moderator, and the action part, where I will be the moderator. So how should the consortium engage, and how should its findings spur action, providing the scientific faith-based evidence connected to faith teachings on caring for the natural resources? In other words, eco-morality or eco-justice via engagements and actions. We have chosen what group you're in, so just in a short while you'll be moved to the 2 science consortiums, group 1 and 2. And then after the 40 minutes in the breakout sessions, we will hear from the group rapporteurs reporting back on the most essential parts of the conversations before we wrap up. So thank you for now. See you in 40 minutes and see you in my group just in a second. Thank you.
Espen, do we have time for 40 minutes? I thought at 9:30 we concluded.
Maybe we
shorten it.
Well, maybe, yeah, we went a little over time. Let's take 30 minutes and then we have approximately 5 minutes to wrap up at the end.
Hello, I see Rudy Odamara.
Oh my.
Did it work?
Yeah, just give it a minute. You'll be fine to you.
So, Rudy, hello.
Yes, hello, Mary. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you as well. And
thank you.
I can't quite see all the names, but oh, Espen, we're together. How did this happen?
Yeah, I don't know. I was put in your room for some reason. Let me see. I'll ask Asmara to move me to another room. 1 second. Sorry about that, Mary Evelyn.
Oh, no. You can stay. Maybe we can introduce ourselves, though, who's in this room for engagement. Hello, Iyad.
So we're back to the main room or what?
Yes, I think we are.
Yeah.
Espen's trying. Oh, Kusamita, nice to see you.
But
And
oh, now this is much better. Now I'm starting to see people.
yes. Okay, and Chris, wonderful. Father Odamara. So, Iyad, would you like to just, while we're getting people on board, would you like to say just, a few sentences about how you see engagement, and just kick us off, so to speak?
My apologies for interrupting. I think that we have re-entered the same room, that we are all now in one room and we're not in two different breakouts.
Oh.
Here we go again.
Yeah. So, Asmaira, are you breaking us back again, or are we staying in the same room? Asmaira, are you there?
Yes.
Yes, we are all in one room now.
Okay, I have just reopened the breakout rooms. It is taking some time to end. Fingers crossed, everybody.
Thank you.
Okay, I think we are in the right room now. Yeah, there's a thumbs up. You can hear what I'm saying. Great. A pleasure meeting all of you here. Now I see Mary Evelyn in my room, but I think you should be in another room, Mary Evelyn.
Well, I have engagement listed up here.
Yeah, and I have action as the moderator. So I'm really sorry about this. Mary Evelyn, you run this group. I will ask Asmara to put me in the other. Sorry about that.
Okay.
I don't know what's wrong with technology.
Moving people into breakout
You know,
rooms.
We could
Okay.
also stay together, Espen, as a whole group if this gets too complicated.
Yeah, Asmara, I need to know your advice, because Mary Evelyn and I are in the same group and we have not been moved into separate rooms.
Right. So it's still moving people automatically into the breakout rooms that were assigned. Okay. Espen, I just got a notification that it failed to open again. Oh, please work.
Maybe, Asmira, we just stay together, Espen, because the topics do overlap.
Okay, Mary Evelyn, I can see that you're assigned to the engagement group, but I don't know why you haven't moved to that room yet.
Okay, let me see. I join room maybe.
Yes, there should be an option to join the room. Martina, you don't have a room. Let me see if I can assign you. Martina.
I did, and then I got kicked out and I had to sign back in.
Okay. See if I can find you here on this list. Okay, go for it. Can I just check who else is still in the main meeting room with me? There should be no one here.
I'm here, but I don't see you. I mean, I hear you. I don't
Okay.
see anyone else.
Give it a minute.
Do you want me to sign back out?
Yeah, Teams is moving you. Teams. The source of my nightmare this past week. For the people who can still hear me. Oh, Mary Evelyn, you're back. Oh no.
I rejoined, but because I got moved out.
So is there an option in the chat to join a breakout room? Do you have that notification?
No.
I don't either.
Martina, I just assigned you to a room.
Nothing's coming up. It did before, and we went, and I saw Mary Evelyn, and then I got black screen.
Okay, so I have just confirmed with the team that people have been assigned, so they are in the breakout rooms now.
Yes.
And so I'm trying to see if I can get you as well. Atmarpit, are you with us? Is there an option to move to a breakout room? Samson? Samson? Mary Evelyn.
Yeah. Yeah. That's Merit. Are you?
I'm still here. Okay, I'm going to try and reassign you to the room.
Okay.
Doing that now. Okay, it's loading. Oh, thank God. Okay, I'm going to do the same thing with you, Martina. I'm going to reassign you.
Oh, I'm still here.
Oh, no.
Should I? Maybe I should.
I didn't get.
Press rejoin. Should I not press anything when you change me?
Yeah, don't press anything when I change you. Okay.
Okay.
Shall I do it again?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, Martina. Hi, Kusumita. What are you doing back here?
Well,
I
it's
had
okay.
a screen, so I restarted my computer, and here I am.
Okay, I will assign you to a breakout room in just a minute. Okay,
Yeah,
you're going to be moved automatically. Don't press anything.
So I'm supposed to be in engagement.
Okay, sending you back there in a minute.
Hi,
Lara,
Mary
are
Ev-
you with us?
Hello, Asmira.
Hi, okay, so I will
Hi.
assign you as well.
Yes.
Just give me a minute.
Yeah, please. Please, thank you.
You'll be moved automatically. You don't click anything.
Automatically. Okay, I
Yeah.
don't. Okay.
Don't click rejoin.
Hi, Chris.
Chris, what happened?
For some reason, it was my computer, I think, actually had a problem. So if you can put me back in the other group, that's fine. It was totally my fault. Like I ended up having to restart again. I'm having so many challenges. I'm just glad it worked through the presentation. So I apologize.
Okay, here we go.
Asmira?
Yes, I'm assigning you, Mary Evelyn. Just give me a minute. Sorry.
Hey, no problem. Chris, you did a great job.
Yes.
Thank you.
That was great.
Thank you.
Super. That's all that matters right now.
Hello there. Greetings, sir. How are you doing?
Okay. So Chris, Martina, Mary Evelyn, Kusumita, you should be
Are you
moving
able to
anytime
join
now.
in
Don't
the
click
session?
anything. It's automatic. Give it a second.
The one from 28 to 4, that's the main one, right?
Yes, that's been going on. You know, this week. It's going on right now, and there's another session that starts at 5:30.
I didn't get the link.
I
was trying to reach out to you.
Yeah, I sent it by email again after I saw. I didn't see your note until later. Let me see where I sent it to.
Room? It says join room.
Yeah,
Yes,
probably.
join room.
Let me double check.
I don't see anything.
Yahoo nowadays, I'm having some challenge. You have my URL right.
Yeah, and I'll put it in WhatsApp too. I'll do both.
Yeah, the URL email would be high, I would appreciate it.
Okay.
Send URL email.
All right, I'll do
Thank
that.
you, brother. Moses.
Okay, yeah, it starts at 5. There's one now, starts one at 5:30, and then next week is the, like I say, it goes on to the 3rd, I believe.
That's something.
Yes.
The 4th.
The 4th, yes. All right.
I was hoping to come, but with this back problem,
Yeah.
I was really hoping like last year, 2 years ago, to attend in person. I know they do it hybrid.
Yes, it's both. And then one of my housemate, his sister is the protocol.
Do you have an
She's the right
option
hand
to?
to
Okay.
the Secretary
It
General.
didn't work. It just sent me out.
Yeah.
Program completely.
Yeah, she's
Me too. That happened to me. And then I signed back in, and maybe that has something to do with it.
Okay, I'm trying to see if there's a link to this other room. I'm trying to join another way. Mary Evelyn, would you like to facilitate the discussion here on engagement? I'm so sorry, everybody.
It's okay. So I know Kusamita, and I'd love to hear the names of the others and just introduce yourself briefly. And Alzamira, happy to have you participate if you can.
Love to.
Good. So would you introduce yourselves just briefly?
Yes. Hi, everybody. My name is Azmaira Alibai, and I work with Dr. Iyad Abu Mogli at the Faith for Earth Initiative. I'm the Faith and Ecosystems Coordinator. And today, for the purpose of the dialogue, I am helping out with the technical aspects, although I shouldn't be too proud to say that this section.
No worries at all. We're happy for all you've done, and you're so responsive. Kusamita, would you like to introduce yourself?
Well, I'm Kusumita Peterson, and I'm in New York City, and I'm an academic in religious studies, and I've known Mary Evelyn and her husband, John Grimm, for more than 40 years. And I'm a member of the board of the Parliament of the World's Religions, where I'm a founding member of the Climate Action Task Force, and we are very strong supporters and co-workers of Iyad Abu Mogli, as well as and Mary Evelyn and John are members of our Climate Action Task Force.
Thank you, Kusamita. Let's continue. One of you just pick it up and introduce yourselves, please. We can't hear you. Oh, are you muted? Okay. Would you like to introduce yourself? The lady at the top of the screen.
Martina?
You're muted.
Hi. Yeah, I can't see. I can't see anybody. So, I'm Martina. Nice to meet you all. I'm very grateful to be here, and thank you for all your work. I am new to this discussion. I am a Climate for Health ambassador, and I'm part of the Planetary Health Alliance, and I've learned a lot about all of the environmental issues that landed me into being a planetary health consultant. I am a very strong advocate over all my work in social work or teaching and other corporate business about holistic health and wellness, and food is a big deal, injustices to others. So I learned about this through the Climate for Health and those groups, Eco America. And I said, that is a group I need to be part of, because I consider myself a spiritual planetary health person. And I am learning where you're all at and how I can be helped.
That's great. It's Martina. Martina?
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, let's continue. I can't see your names, so if one of you who's just joined can introduce yourself. Maybe the lady at the top of my screen.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, I'm Indu Bala and I'm a doctoral student at Goethe University, Germany. So I'm just preparing for my fieldwork. I work on the intersections of religion and the advocacy of biodiversity in Odisha and India. So I'm trying to understand how the local worship of goddess Lakshmi is deeply ecological, and how the icon of Lakshmi can be interpreted and vis-a-vis the changing rice cultivation in the region, and what are the values that can be brought in by these organizations that are working on the ground. So I'm leaving to my field in April, so I'm happy to get to discuss, and this little room is even more productive for me personally, I think. Thank you, and thank you for meeting you all, and bye-bye. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. You should know Kusumita's specialty is Hinduism, so we're all familiar with Lakshmi as well, so we're interested in what you're doing. Can you continue introducing yourselves? Anyone, just jump in, unmute.
Joseph?
Can you unmute? Introduce
Samson?
yourself.
Joseph, I see you're unmuted. If you'd like to introduce yourself.
Introduce, please. Just introduce yourself.
Hello. Can
Hello.
you hear me? Sorry.
Go ahead, Joseph. Go ahead, Joseph. Joseph, can you unmute and introduce yourself?
It seems like you'll have to connect your mic or put your mic on. Okay, while you figure that out, maybe Samson, go ahead.
Okay. Hello. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you very much. My name is Samson Muchiri. I'm a graduate intern from Kabarak University Press, Kenya. I'm so glad to be able to join you today. I'm also fairly new to the conversation. I'm here courtesy of Asmira. And yes, I'm really happy. Thank you.
Good. Thank you. Okay, okay, would you like to introduce yourself? Our final person here. Asmira, no.
Is it me?
Yeah. Yes. Yes, please.
Yes. Sorry, because I was disconnected. So I'm Lara. I'm Lara Hanna from Lebanon. I'm the national coordinator of the Faith for Earth initiative in Lebanon. Actually, I'm the former dean of the Agriculture and Food Sciences at the Holy Spirit University of Nasrik in Lebanon, and I'm so really delighted to be here today to participate in this really interactive working group. As you may know, we are in Lebanon facing a lot of problems actually, and mainly we have in Lebanon 18 confessions. So the Faith for Earth, I mean the link between religion and science will be really helpful to help our people to survive and to protect more, to understand and to raise this awareness about the environment and how science could really play an important role to protect our environment. So thank you for this opportunity today.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And finally, would you like to introduce yourself? I don't know your name. Yes, can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, if you can hear me, my name's Junior Campbell. I prefer to be called Jay.
Jay, okay.
Yeah, and my organization is Intellect International.
Okay, and what does it do?
Transcend the kind of barriers that we're trying.
Okay, good. So we have a wonderful international group here, and the topic of engagement, of course, with science and religion is a very big one. And part of the issue has been that science doesn't want to advocate for moral issues. So sometimes we have this facts over here, values over here, and that becomes a bit of a problem. So if anybody wants to respond with, we know the action has to take place, as you've just said, but what about engage? How can we bring scientists on board? Jay, you want to say something?
Yeah, I got disconnected. Sorry about that.
No problem.
I'm a linguist by training, and my focus is on linguistic barriers to understanding, to engagement and action. So for starters, I would suggest that we see engagement as a kind of action. In fact, especially against the backdrop of what's happening now in Ukraine, we can see where a failure of constructive engagement precludes any constructive action with devastating consequences. So I'll leave that there.
Excellent point. Thank you so much. Diplomacy and engagement. Yes, Kusamita, please.
I think, not just in an academic setting and like an elite academic setting like Yale University or Columbia University, even in a university, it's possible that this is happening and you tell us. But in the broader culture, there are stereotypes. People have stereotypes of what science is. Even a distinguished speaker in yesterday's Green Faith session on investment, it was not part of UNEP, distinguished scholar from India was repeatedly saying that science is materialist. And he's an economist at a university. And then you have a movement like the so-called new atheism. You have philosophers who are saying religion denies science and is stupid, but science can explain everything. So in our larger culture, we still have this polarity. And so, as in other areas of life, when people from different groups come together, the first thing they have to do is get rid of their stereotypes of each other. And we had this in the major groups and stakeholders before UNIA. We heard a lot about how religion is bad, and there was no distinction between, if several billion people are adherents of religions, but we were hearing that they're all alike. So I'll leave it at that. We need to work with plurality.
Yes, thank you. From polarity to respect for plurality, we could say.
Can I pick up where Kumita left off?
Please.
Because what she is saying underscores the challenge of effective communication, getting beyond the stereotypes. And I also, by speaking to the plurality or the numbers, the size of our various religious groups, we underscored the complexity again. And especially in Christianity, according to my study, and I've been on this journey now 40 years, both as a scientist, a linguist, and as a believer. And the greatest crisis is in that communication. The greatest challenge is in getting people to hear and understand where each other are coming from without prejudgment, without stereotypes, and with optimism rather than cynicism. And Dr. Reverend Carter, he spoke about this being a life and death issue. Here in the UK, I'm a Barbadian based in England, and here in the UK, I think last year we passed 30 knife stabbing deaths for the first time. I'm not sure if that's countrywide or in the London area, but there's a crisis of communication that can be manifested as it is in Ukraine or as it is on the streets of London on a almost day-to-day basis, almost day-to-day. And it is a life and death issue. My study over 40 years now, or going on 40 years, this come June, of Christianity, suggests that as it says in 2 Corinthians 3:6, we're ministers of the new covenant of the spirit, not the letter. So there's a fundamental legalism. It says the letter killeth. And that's the crux of the challenge, because personally, I've got serious issues with the New Testament as opposed to the New Covenant. I think they're two different things, and they've been confused for the past at least 1900 years to the detriment of believers.
Mm-hmm.
And
yes. Jay, I think this is extremely important. I just want to make sure we get these other ladies at the top of the screen drawing that in as well. But you've made excellent points. I'll report them back when we come back to the big group communication. Yeah. Would one of you ladies like to jump in? Matilda or the lady from Lebanon, would you like to jump in?
I'm wondering if I can jump in now. Can you hear me?
Of course. Yes, we can hear you now.
I'm so glad my microphone wasn't working for a while. I'm Joseph de Rivera from Clark University, and I'm very interested in this. I've been studying a philosopher who's very relevant to us. His name is John McMurray. He wrote the Gifford Lectures back in 1950. And he presents a philosophy that really enables us to unite science and religion. So I'll send some information out on him. If we can have people's emails at some point, Mary Evelyn, that'd be really nice.
Okay, I don't know if I can do that, but Joseph, give me your last name, please.
De Rivera. It's a D-E and then a river with an A on the end.
Okay, and can you just say though something about what John McMurray, what does he contribute?
Yes, his philosophy is one that's in essence based on the child-mother relationship. In other words, we're fundamentally mutual beings rather than individuals, and our individuality gets differentiated out of that mutuality. And in this view, we create science and ritual. Religions to be understood in terms of ritual action, it's science derives from that, as it were, rather than vice versa.
Wonderful. Well, there's lots of useful resources in those Gifford Lectures, and here at Yale we have the Terry Lectures, which are on science and religion that go all the way back to William James and so on. But in another year, we're having Robin Kimmerer, who's a Native American Potawatomi and botanist, and she's going to speak about traditional environmental knowledge and science and religion. So I think that's going to be a breakthrough from more traditional views. Anyone else want to jump in here? Matilda or yes.
Yes. Is there another person who wanted to talk? That's Matilda. I'm Martina. I just wanted to make sure.
No, Martina, please.
Okay. So I have a couple of experiences of people of science coming out and talking about spirituality. I think we all know about Dr. Goodall, right? And the Templeton Foundation. somehow connecting to what's popular and motivating right now, because I've been involved in listening and learning and reading those books. Dr. Canary Webb, Health and Harmony, what's happening around the world. You know her? She is also speaking about her spirituality as part of her science. Guardian for the Trees. And the Eco America.
Martina.
And I am going to stop you now. So thank you so much, everyone. We have 5 minutes left. We want to hear.
We're actually all back, I think.
Yeah, I think we're all back now.
Yeah.
So can you hear me now?
My screen is black. I can't see anybody.
We are slowly getting back, everyone. As long as you can hear us, it's great. We will now spend 2 minutes from the two rapporteurs to hear the most important findings from the conversation, and then we'll wrap up in 1 minute. So we stop sharply 9:30 Eastern Standard Time. Alberto Palecki, in your group.
Thanks so much, and please, if you can mute your microphones if you're not speaking, thanks. Yes, we discussed, it was a quite lively discussion.
Alberto, you're muted. Yep, now we can hear you.
Sorry, thanks so much. So it was a very lively discussion. We discussed a few points. First of all, we remarked the fact that in engagement, obviously, academia is important, but it's also important to connect with the practitioners, the religious leaders, the clerics, bringing the more context to the working level of the practitioners. There was a comment as well saying that if there's one good thing of this pandemic is that it can help us really discover this interconnection with religious and science and bring us to a common ground. So let's use this as an opportunity to re-engage. Then we try to ask ourselves, is there already an existing platform there that brings religious leaders and science together? If not, how can we bring the consortium to bring their place to be, and how can we scale it and make it efficient? We then discussed a little bit some of the examples that were there. We mentioned the Alliance on Religious and Conservation back there. We mentioned that there are some more scientific organizations that are doing a little bit of work in this domain. WWF was mentioned. WRI can be another example, but there was a consensus that there is not yet a place like the one that we want to build. We need to build better networks, and specifically we need to realize how to fit into the policy-making process. For example, the UN Assembly or the Stockholm Plus 50 that we will also be engaging on. Another suggestion.
Your time is up now, so I'm sorry to stop you, but we have to give Carrick a space for the other group. Carrick, the floor is yours now. Sorry, Alberto.
Okay, thank you. Within the action group, we really had 4 foci. The first was education, specifically encouraging interdisciplinary engagement between humanities and science, and also looking at a return to pre-colonial or land-based education systems. The next was collaboration, the importance of faith-based action within scientific organizations, but also scientists within faith-based organizations, and the resources required to do this work, financial and human resources. The third was measurements, specifically ensuring that we have tools to measure and be accountable with our actions, as well as measure the potential impact of religious institutions in the environmental sustainability space. And the final was changing worldviews, recognizing that religious institutions and faith-based groups have an enormous role to play in raising consciousness, changing worldviews, and redefining values, and looking at a shift towards sustainability and community well-being, particularly caring for all of society, over current trends toward economic growth or profit, or other practices which are depleting Earth's resources.
Thank you very much, Carrick. So on behalf of the UN Faith for Earth, the Yale Forum on Religion and Ecology, and the World Resources Institute Faith and Sustainability, I want to thank all of you for participating today. Thank you for the contributions from our speakers. We will now follow up in this group of organizers, and you will hear back from us when we have had time to digest the inputs from today. So from Washington, D.C., thank you, everyone. Have a continued good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Thank you.
And join us now to the Faith, Values, and Ethics session. See you there. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.